There is a statistic that should stop you cold. In a 1961 experiment conducted by psychologist Stanley Milgram at Yale University, 65% of ordinary, everyday people were willing to administer what they believed were fatal electric shocks to a stranger, simply because someone in a lab coat told them to. Not soldiers, not criminals, not people with violent histories, regular people, teachers, accountants, fathers, mothers. And they kept pressing that button while a voice on the other side of the wall screamed in agony. That number, 65%, is not an outlier. It has been replicated across dozens of countries, across decades, across cultures. And what it reveals about the human mind is something most of us are deeply, profoundly uncomfortable acknowledging. We are not as free as we think we are. Welcome to Mind Atlas. What you are about to hear is not a political commentary. It is not about any specific leader or movement. It is something far more unsettling than that. It is about you, about the architecture of your own brain, about why human beings across every civilization that has ever existed have repeatedly handed over their minds, their moral compasses, and sometimes their lives to people who should have sent every alarm in their nervous system screaming. This is the dark psychology behind why humans are hardwired to follow dangerous leaders. Let us start at the very beginning. The human brain was not designed for the modern world. It was designed for the savannah. For small tribes of 30 to 150 people surrounded by constant, life-threatening danger. In that environment, having a strong, confident, decisive leader was not a preference. It was survival. When a predator appeared, you did not have time to hold a committee meeting. You needed someone to point and say, "Run," and you needed to run without questioning it. The brain systems that emerged from that environment are still running inside your skull right now, largely unchanged, making decisions that feel like wisdom but are actually ancient survival shortcuts. Psychologists call one of these shortcuts the halo effect. When someone displays a single powerful trait, physical dominance, loud confidence, and unwavering certainty in their own vision, your brain automatically attributes a cascade of other positive qualities to that person. Intelligence, competence, trustworthiness. You are not doing this consciously. It is happening below the surface, in the same neural architecture that once helped your ancestors quickly decide who to follow away from the lion. The terrifying consequence of this is that charisma and capability are not the same thing. But to your prehistoric brain, they feel identical. And that single cognitive error has toppled democracies, filled mass graves, and ended civilizations. Now here is where it gets darker. Dangerous leaders do not just accidentally stumble upon these psychological weaknesses. The most effective ones exploit them with surgical precision. There is a pattern that researchers have documented across history, from cult leaders to authoritarian dictators, and it follows a frighteningly consistent formula. First comes the identification of a wound. Every dangerous leader begins by locating a genuine source of pain in a population. Economic suffering, cultural anxiety, a sense of humiliation, a fear of being forgotten or replaced. The wound is real. The suffering is real. This is critical because it is what makes the manipulation feel like compassion. They are not making you afraid. They are acknowledging a fear you already carry. Then comes the enemy. Once the wound has been identified and inflamed, the dangerous leader provides a target. Not a complex systemic explanation for your suffering, those are unsatisfying and require effort to understand. Instead, a face, a group, a scapegoat. Your brain, already primed by fear and in search of a threat to neutralize, accepts this explanation with startling ease. Neuroscientists have found that when the human brain perceives a threat, the prefrontal cortex, the seat of rational, nuanced thinking, actually reduces in activity. Your capacity for critical thought diminishes precisely when you need it most. The leader who offers you a simple enemy in a moment of fear is not appealing to your intelligence. They are bypassing it entirely. Then comes the salvation. The leader presents themselves as the only possible solution, not one option among many. the only one. And this exclusivity triggers something deep in the tribal brain. In a world of uncertainty, the person with absolute certainty feels like shelter. Psychologist Eric Hoffer wrote in 1951 that mass movements can rise and spread without a belief in a god, but never without a belief in a devil. The dangerous leader becomes your god. The enemy becomes your devil. And somewhere in this transaction, your individual judgment quietly goes offline. But perhaps the most disturbing mechanism of all is something called social proof. Human beings are social creatures who regulate their own beliefs by watching what others believe. When you see a crowd moving in one direction, the ancient part of your brain registers this as safety information. If everyone else is doing it, it must be right. It must be safe. This is why dangerous movements grow, not despite their visibility, but because of it. Every new follower makes the movement more credible to the next potential follower. The very size of a following becomes its own argument for legitimacy. You can watch this process happen in real time across history, and it never stops being chilling, because it means that no individual in a crowd necessarily made a fully conscious, fully free choice. They were all, to some degree, following each other. There is a concept in psychology called the authoritarian personality, first studied rigorously in the aftermath of World War II by Theodor Adorno and his colleagues. They were trying to answer what seemed like an impossible question. How did an entire nation participate in systematic genocide? What they found was that susceptibility to dangerous authoritarian leadership is not randomly distributed across a population. It correlates with specific psychological traits: a high need for order and certainty, a discomfort with ambiguity, a tendency to think in rigid in-group and out-group categories, and crucially, a deep underlying anxiety that has been suppressed rather than processed. People who have been raised in environments of harsh, unpredictable authority do not necessarily grow up to reject authority. Counterintuitively, they often grow up to crave it. The familiar discomfort of submission can feel more tolerable than the terrifying freedom of self-determination. And this connects to one of the most deeply suppressed truths in all of psychology. Following is, for many people, genuinely easier than thinking independently. Philosopher Erich Fromm called this the escape from freedom. The burden of making your own moral judgments, of tolerating uncertainty, of accepting that the world is complex and that you might be wrong. This burden is heavier than most people admit. A leader who takes that burden away, who gives you a clear map of good and evil, who tells you that your side is righteous and the other side is corrupt, that leader is offering something that genuinely feels like relief. Fromm warned, writing in 1941, that this escape from the anxiety of freedom is one of the most powerful and dangerous forces in human psychology. He was writing about the rise of fascism. He might as well have been writing about tomorrow. So where does this leave us? If these vulnerabilities are baked into our neurology, if they are ancient and powerful and largely unconscious, are we simply doomed to repeat this pattern forever? This is where psychology offers something that looks, carefully, like hope, but only if we are willing to accept a deeply uncomfortable premise. The protection against dangerous leaders is not finding better leaders. It is developing a ruthlessly honest relationship with your own fear. Every manipulation technique that dangerous leaders use requires fear as its fuel. Fear of the enemy. Fear of uncertainty. Fear of being left behind, replaced, humiliated, destroyed. When you learn to recognize your own fear responses, when you can sit with anxiety without immediately reaching for the nearest person promising to eliminate it, the spell begins to break. The research on psychological resilience against manipulation consistently points to the same variables: critical thinking practiced as a discipline, exposure to genuine intellectual diversity, and perhaps most importantly, a community of people who are committed to challenging each other rather than simply validating each other. The Milgram experiment did find one thing that reduced obedience dramatically. When subjects could see another person in the room refusing to follow the authority figure's instructions, compliance dropped from 65% to 10%. One person willing to say no out loud in front of others changed everything. Your brain is ancient. Its vulnerabilities are real, But so is your capacity to choose in a single moment of clarity to think for yourself. That capacity is also who you are. If this kind of deep psychological exploration changes how you see yourself and the world around you, Mind Atlas is where we go further. Subscribe now and turn on notifications so you never miss a video, because the most powerful thing you can do in a world that profits from your unawareness is to understand your own mind better than anyone trying to manipulate it does.